know, 5 years ago, I would have been astonished if somebody had said that I would be standing before you talking about predatory gambling, because like a lot of Americans who have, you know, good educations and good jobs, the world of state-sponsored gambling just did not exist for me. And, you know, I'd go to mini marts and buy my gas, and I realized there were a lot of people standing in line behind me, but it never occurred to me they were there to buy scratch tickets. Or, you know, on the nightly news, when they'd have the daily lottery winnings or the Powerball winning numbers, I'd use that as an opportunity to get up from the TV and go brush my teeth. So, you know, it just was not at all on my radar screen. So I wanted to spend this time doing two things. First of all, just sort of describing how and why I got here today, sort of either an odyssey story or a conversion story, I'm not sure which. And then to talk a little bit more nuts and bolts about what I call a think tank strategy that can help advance the work of what you're doing. So first, well, just by way of introduction, I'm a historian by training and a writer by trade. And a few years back, my friend and colleague, David Blankenhorn, who's the president of a think tank in New York called Institute for American Values, called me up out of the blue and said, how would you like to join a scholarly group that's working on the topic of thrift? And, you know, it was, well, it was 2005. And so thrift was on nobody's mind in 2005. And although now we see this all in retrospect with perfect clarity, back then we were in the grips of this mass delusion that we could live on borrowed money forever and ever and it would have no consequences. And I remember thinking back to that time, you know, if you weren't renovating your house or putting new granite countertops in your kitchen or buying a supersized SUV, you were sort of out of the loop. You were out of the mainstream. So when I told people, well, you know, I'm in this project, we're going to study thrift, they thought it was the weirdest thing they had ever heard of. This was like nutty to be studying thrift at a time when we didn't need it anymore. But there were two things even back then that made me think it might not be so nutty to start thinking about the American tradition of thrift. And one was that the first sort of red flag was the personal savings rate, which was in 2005, 2006, was heading into the basement, into zero territory. And there had been only 2 times that that had happened in the fairly recent past, and when the personal savings rate had been close to zero for an entire year. And that was in 1931 and 32, in the, you know, when the nation was struggling with the Great Depression. So even though people thought we were, you know, just like things were great, we were in this great prosperous period, the personal savings rate was really historically low. So that was one thing. And the second thing that caught my attention as I began to look around was this, what I saw as a, you know, massive transformation in the institutions in the financial sector. Changes in the financial landscape, again, happening completely under the radar. So suddenly, all across the country, we saw these new predatory lending institutions popping up. Well, we now know a lot about the predatory or subprime mortgage brokers, but that was just one. There were also credit card issuers who had targeted a group of Americans who were lower income and could not possibly pay off the total balance on their credit card on a monthly basis, but could probably pay the minimum balance. And they were, as part of a business plan, they were targeted, so subprime credit card issuers came on the line. And then there were the auto title lenders and the outfits that would give you an advance on your tax refund at a very high interest rate, even though you could actually ask the IRS to direct deposit your return. But a lot of people didn't know that or didn't have bank accounts, and so there was that. There were pawn shops. There were big chains popping up. And finally, and last of all in the sort of litany of predatory lending institutions, we had the arrival of payday lending. And actually, I noticed if you go out on the street here, there's both a lotto place and right next to it a place that offers, if not payday loans, title loans, quick and easy cash. You know, these institutions, individually and collectively, were pushing instant money and fast and easy credit at APRs of 200 to 500%. And their business plan was actually, as I said, to build a customer base of low-income Americans and get them to become heavily dependent on very expensive credit. And of course, even though the times were good, this business plan worked. Why? Because, you know, underneath the froth and the bubble, a lot of working Americans were no longer able to live paycheck to paycheck. So they were turning to plastic and payday lending in order simply to make ends meet, to cover, you know, an auto repair or even a grocery bill or something special for the kids. And as they became dependent on consumer credit, they began to fall into this debt trap, this debt hole that they couldn't possibly climb out of. And then the bust came, and we all can write the ending to that story. So we had, you know, joblessness, then foreclosures, then bankruptcy, then homelessness for a whole lot of working Americans. But, and here was the thing that applies to what you're doing, it struck me as I looked around that these private sector predatory lending institutions weren't the only predators on the block. That there was another one that was actually, to me, you know, naively looking around, even more shocking, and that was the state-sponsored lottery. As I was learning the history, I learned that for 75 years, there was not a single state in the United States that had the most popular form of gambling, which is the lottery. It was banned. It was banned and written into some state constitutions. But by the time I started paying attention, 42 states plus the District of Columbia, now 43 with the addition of Arkansas, have lotteries, and only 2 states in the entire nation have no form of state-sponsored legal gambling, and there are Utah and Hawaii. So why the lottery? Well, the lottery didn't make loans, obviously, but what made it predatory was that they too were targeting low-income Americans and encouraging them to spend their spare cash on gambling rather than savings. So this mattered, you know, as I was thinking about the transformation of the financial institutions that served Americans. And the lottery was telling citizens that their small change could magically be turned into instant wealth, $1 for the American dream. So, you know, sometimes you learn these facts from books and articles, but the emotional truth doesn't hit you till you see it right up in front of your eyes. And so the moment of emotional truth came for me when I went back to, on one of my periodic visits to the town that I grew up in, Appleton, Wisconsin, you know, a town that at the time I was there was about 30,000 to 40,000 people, heartland town. And I grew up there in the 1950s, and I think I had quite an idyllic childhood. It was sort of a city that was part of the expanding post-war middle class. And we had a pretty substantial working class that did well because there were good union jobs in the paper mills at the time. And so people had, you know, good income. They enjoyed their families. They enjoyed life. They rooted for the Packers. They, you know, ate fish on Fridays. You know, if they afforded, the summers, and summers were precious in Wisconsin because they're short. You know, they'd rent a cottage on a lake, and life was good. And the other thing I would say.